All right, let's dive straight into a genuinely revolutionary shift in the history of ideas. Today, we're unpacking Thomas Hobbes' scientific political methodology in this explainer. If you've ever wondered how modern political science actually got the science part of its name, well, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to explore how Hobbes looked at the chaotic, totally unpredictable world of politics and decided to completely rewire it into a precise, mathematically certain discipline. It's an absolutely fascinating journey of intellectual engineering.
So here's the roadmap for how we're going to break this down today. First, politics as an exact science. Second, history versus deductive geometry. Third, reason as exact reckoning. Fourth, his breakdown and build-up method. Fifth, humans as moving machines. And finally, revolutionizing civil philosophy. We're basically going to mirror Hobbes' own logical method here, deconstructing his tools and then building them back up.
Starting off with Section 1, Politics as an Exact Science.
Okay, put yourself in the 17th century for a second. It was a time of massive, violent political upheaval, specifically the English Civil War. And right in the middle of all that terrifying chaos, Hobbes has this incredibly radical ambition. He decides he wants to make politics as certain and mathematically precise as geometry and science. Just think about how wild that was for the time. To look at the messy, emotional, blood-soaked realm of human politics and say, you know what, I'm going to solve this with the absolute certainty of a math equation. He didn't want people's mere opinions. He wanted undeniable, foundational truth.
Which brings us to Section 2, History versus Deductive Geometry.
To really grasp how big of a shift this was, think about Niccolo Machiavelli. Machiavelli used an inductive method. He looked out at the fast-paced, messy reality of history, observed how real leaders were actually behaving, and tried to quickly pull practical lessons from all that chaos. It's totally grounded in unpredictable human history. But Hobbes, he pumps the brakes. He completely rejects that historical approach. Instead, he uses a deductive method. He starts with deliberate, unwavering theoretical axioms. He defines the absolute fundamental principles of human nature first, and then slowly, logically deduces his conclusions from those rules. He goes from abstract, solid principles to complex reality, not the other way around.
And get this, what actually sparked his obsession with deduction? Well, according to John Aubrey's famous biography, Brief Lives, Hobbes was already about 40 years old when he had this massive intellectual awakening. Story goes, he stumbled upon a copy of Euclid's Elements of Geometry, lying open in a library. He reads a theorem, thinks to himself, wait, that's impossible, and traces it back, step by step, to the basic axioms. He was totally mesmerized. At age 40, his whole intellectual trajectory flips. He realizes that if you just start with undeniably true definitions, you can logically prove the most incredibly complex conclusions with absolute certainty.
So that sets up Section 3, the very foundation of his system, reason as exact reckoning.
Now, quick tip here. If you're ever writing a paper or taking an exam on this stuff, using the exact phrase reason as reckoning instantly elevates your analysis. In chapters 4 and 5 of his masterpiece, Leviathan, Hobbes lays out his philosophy of language. He argues that reasoning isn't some mystical, divine insight that just hits you. Not at all. It is literally just calculating. It's the systematic adding and subtracting of words and definitions exactly the same way a mathematician adds and subtracts numbers.
And this is all rooted in a philosophical concept called nominalism. Basically, nominalism says that words are just labels. They're just names we assign to things. They don't have some hidden magical essence inside them. Because words are just markers that we use in our mental math, a strong logical chain requires incredibly strict definitions. Think about it. If you start your political math problem with the wrong definitions, the whole equation collapses. It leads to what Hobbes literally called absurd conclusions. That's exactly why he spends so many pages just defining basic terms. If the definitions are airtight, his final proof for the state will be completely undeniable.
All right, let's move into Section 4, Breakdown and Build Up.
So how do you actually apply math-like calculation to a whole society of people? Well, Hobbes borrowed a very specific scientific framework from the physical sciences, specifically from Paduan philosophers like Zabarella and, of course, the physicist Galileo. It's known as the resolutive compositive method. Step 1 is resolution. You take a highly complex object, like the state, and you break it down, you resolve it into its absolute simplest parts. For Hobbes, that meant dismantling society all the way down to the isolated individual human being, driven by nothing but basic desires and fears. Then, step 2 is composition. Once you fully understand those simple parts, you logically synthesize them back together to see how they inevitably form a commonwealth. It's like taking a watch apart to look at the gears, and then putting it back together so you know exactly how it ticks.
And the reason this works for Hobbes is a crucial takeaway. The state is an artificial construct. Hobbes believed we could never fully grasp the deep mysteries of the natural world because God made nature. But humans, we built the state. Because it's an artificial machine of our own making, we can comprehend its mechanics with the exact same geometric clarity as a triangle drawn on a piece of paper.
Which leads us right into Section 5, Humans as Moving Machines.
To understand that artificial state, we have to look at the gears themselves. Hobbes was fully on board with a worldview called mechanistic materialism. He believed the entire universe is simply matter in motion. And yep, that includes us. The human mind isn't some ethereal, mysterious soul. It operates just like a machine. External objects hit our senses and create motion inside us. That internal motion produces our desires, what he called appetites, and our aversions. So, things like the drive for power, the paralyzing grip of fear, the instinct to just survive. For Hobbes, these are not grand moral failings. They aren't divine attributes. They are purely mechanical, cause and effect reactions. He literally strips human behavior of all that grand theology and boils it straight down to physics.
Bringing all of this together, we hit Section 6, Revolutionizing Modern Civil Philosophy.
The acclaimed historian Quentin Skinner points out something super interesting here about how this methodology actually evolved. In his earlier work, Deceive, Hobbes thought the pure logical geometric method was all he needed. He figured, if you just lay out the mathematical proof, rational people will obviously accept it. But by the time he sits down to write Leviathan, the English Civil War is raging. And he realizes a harsh truth. Pure logic just isn't enough to move the masses. The cold logic of geometry needed the persuasive fire of rhetoric. He had to dress his mathematical proofs up in compelling language, metaphors, and striking imagery, like the terrifying sea monster Leviathan itself, if he wanted to actually persuade the public.
The academic J.W.N. Watkins nails it in his book Hobbes' System of Ideas. He calls Hobbes' methodology a Galilean Euclidean synthesis. It's a heavy phrase, but it perfectly captures what he did. Hobbes successfully took the physical, resolutive, compositive physics of Galileo, fused it with the deductive, logical certainty of Euclid's geometry, and forged an entirely new, incredibly powerful weapon for political theory.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together. This is your screenshot moment if you're taking notes. In essence, Hobbes' scientific method starts with reason as reckoning, building arguments through insanely strict definitions. He structures those arguments using Euclid's deductive axioms. He analyzes society using Galileo's method, breaking the state down into individual parts and logically building it back up. He grounds his view of humans in mechanistic materialism, seeing us as complex, reacting machines. And the ultimate goal tying all this together? To yank politics out of the chaotic realm of history and elevate it into a deeply certain science. It's the absolute foundation for modern rationalist political theory.
But before we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really chew on. While Hobbes' method brilliantly freed political science from theology, his critics argue it came at a pretty steep price. By reducing human behavior to mathematical geometry and mechanical physics, do we end up completely ignoring the rich, complex, and totally unpredictable diversity of real history? Basically, is extreme reductionism just the inevitable price we have to pay if we want scientific certainty in politics? It's a massive question, and it's one political scientists are still wrestling with today. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the foundations of everything we think we know. Catch you next time.